Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today we have a very special guest with me. We've had a few, celebrities on the show, and I think Ms. Kimberly Spencer here qualifies for that. One Google search will bring her right up to the top of your page. Top 3% podcast in the world, especially for women and empowering women, but also empowering everyone. Hashtag Yas Queen. We have Kimberly Spencer, host of Crown Yourself, an entrepreneur, a speaker, an author, and so much more. We will mention Pilates later. And I got to meet her at Podfest where I found out she is also an awesome dancer. The 80s party revealed that Kimberly is very young and very energetic. So, Miss Kimberly, what can you share with us today? We're so glad to have you here.
I'm so honored to be here. I found Podfest to be so fun, and I think there comes a point, especially for me after birthing two children, where you
Right.
just don't care what other people think about you.
Yes, ma'am.
Like there's just a level of I'm going to be me 100%. And I lived my life in the past in many ways where I would hide pieces of me or
Right.
cover up pieces of me that other people deemed inappropriate or whatnot. And they're like being able to have the amazing relationship that I've had for 11 years with my husband and then my two glorious kids and having gone through all the life experiences, built multiple businesses and had multiple failures and had multiple challenges and setbacks.
Right.
Like there just comes a point and an age that you're just unapologetically you. And it's very liberating.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely trying to work on that. Everyone's always trying to get me to dance, and I'm like, I know a bit of the Cotton Eye Joe, fittingly so, but I can't do too much else. Actually, I got scarred. So in middle school, we did this thing called Dance Ember, where for the whole
Hmm.
month of December in gym class, we would, learn new dances and stuff like that. And so I was the only person like super into it. I was so enthusiastic. I was like, this is awesome because it is what you make it, right? If you have a class full
Yeah.
of people who just are like depressed and bummed out about it. They just want to play hockey. Like it's gonna be a bad time. Sometimes you have to like embrace the suck, as they say. And
Hmm.
I was a little too enthusiastic and rolled over my ankle during the they call it the cha-cha electric slide and got taken out in a wheelchair. The most shameful moment of my life is being wheeled out of gym class in middle school because I hurt my ankle. Doing the electric slide a little too electric, a little too much slide, but
Enthusiastically. I had the same thing at my engagement party. I was doing the Running Man to, I think it was like
okay.
Jump. Um, what it was a song. I was basically my husband goes, "You weren't following the instructions of the song." And I was like, that so I
Yeah.
totally twisted my ankle. Thank God I had my cranial sacral therapist there working on me because she's like, okay, we're gonna work on your ankle right now because it's currently incredibly inflamed.
Yeah, yeah. That's very fortunate that you had that there. And it's funny, my buddy the Slayer, he's come on the show a couple episodes and his underneath his pants on his calves, he's got full medical kits. He's got like throwing knives, he's got, first aid kits, tourniquets, all this stuff. So anywhere we go, I'm like, I know I
You're
can let
set.
loose a little bit because yeah, we're set. He like first responder on the scene and so but it's difficult because he's the dance animal when we go out. You give that guy one drink and I remember he ran out we went to this country bar and, they had bull riding, which is always a fun time, the mechanical bull riding. And
Mm-hmm.
they had
Done
the
that.
dancing and you're like, like kind of like you not following the instructions, he's there for the square dancing and line dancing. And he's just doing this disco groove stuff in a neon pink shirt in the country club. Everyone's dressed kind of like how I dress for the show. And, but yeah, but we didn't come here to talk about dance, but it's always a great time. So we came here to talk about how it does tie in with you being yourself is optimism, empowering people and great stories of transformation. So can you tell us about your show and why you started it?
Well, I started it because I was in a podcast mastermind. I've been a coach for the past 9 years, and it was 2019. I was in a podcast mastermind, and I was the only one without a podcast. And it was two. It was with my
Wow.
friends, Summer Scalero of She Lives Holy, and Alan and Kevin of the Next Level University podcast, which is a global top 100 podcast. And I was like,
Oh
I
yeah.
should probably, I should probably have a podcast to be in
Yeah.
this mastermind. And so I started it. And initially, it was called The Princess and the Bee, of all the bees that go into becoming the queen of your life. I wanted
Oh,
to
Queen
have it be
Bee.
a place, yeah, so Queen Bee, right? So I
Yeah.
wanted to have it be a place where there could be stories of transformation, stories that would uplift and empower and help people feel like they're not alone in their challenges. Because the beautiful thing about how I love to interview is I don't want to hear the highlight reel. You can see that on a Facebook, you can
Right.
see that on Instagram. You're like, oh my gosh, I love the jets, I love the travel, I love, her life, all
Yeah.
all of the things. But what I love about podcasts in particular is you're able to go deep very
Right.
quickly into the meat of why people made certain decisions, what's their belief systems, what's holding them back, what did hold them back in the past, so that we allow ourselves to shift our environment by who we surround ourselves with. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that you're
True.
most
Oh
like the
yeah.
five people that you surround yourself with. That doesn't necessarily mean that those are the people that are your friends. Like it could be the
That's for
people that
sure.
the
Yeah.
news that you listen to, the podcasts that you listen to, the media outlets, those are also voices in your head that are shaping your paradigm of your reality. If you're constantly listening to things that are bringing you down or putting you in a negative state, then it's going to affect your mood, your
Right.
attitude, your physiology, how you show up in the world. If you're focusing on things that are more abundance focused and possibility focused, and that, yes, I think also need to share concurrently the challenges and struggles along with the positive, or else we feel like, oh, yeah, it's good for you, but I'm currently in this sucky moment right now that really sucks. And how does that person relate to me? But as soon as you can hear the story, like when I share my story of growing up with a father who was an addict and the multiple forms of abuse, like before we started recording, I mentioned the ACE study, the childhood adversity test,
Right.
that basically, it says that if you have a score of 4, then you are at severe risk for anxiety and depression. And my score was 8 growing up, just because of the
Right.
emotional, sexual, different forms of abuse that come with growing up with an addict. And yet simultaneously, I also had when he was sober, an amazing loving father. So there's that dichotomy that I am able to share, that suddenly people who are like, oh, she has all these things. She has Google search, like her name's the first to come up. Like, yeah, I
Right.
did all that. And there's also a past. And I think that there's sometimes people see the motivational or the optimist, and that optimism is not forged in delusion entirely. Like it is forged because I have seen the dark side of humanity,
Right.
and I have chosen, because I tried the pessimistic perspective. It sucked.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was so mean to myself. I was 10 years stuck in an eating disorder where
Mm.
I constantly had anxiety and depression. Like I know what it's like to be on that side. And I also know the choice of when you choose to have that optimistic outlook of looking at, how is this the best thing for me? How is this changing me? How is this opening me up to new possibilities? How is this growing me? That changes the game for how you look at the lens of how everything that shapes your experience of life.
Right. Yeah, and you hit close to home because my father is an abusive addict too. And what I want to talk about is you talked about optimism, pessimism, and the different
Mhm.
views and perceptions people have of that. So my father was a cop for 25 years, and he saw, and I never realized this until my grandfather pointed out, because I grew up, my dad was like afraid of the world. I wasn't allowed to leave the house. I operated a submarine before I ever used a stove. Like people were always shocked by that. Like the stove was dangerous, people were dangerous. I wasn't really allowed to have friends, and my dad really dictated my life, and I never understood it. And my grandfather put it in perspective for me in some way. He said, "Well, Mr. Whiskey, you got to think." He saw the worst of people. As a cop, sometimes you see the worst of people. And I've had cops come on the
Yeah.
show, even just detectives, talk about, mutilated bodies, and, households that are just in ruin. And kind of relating it to what you said is we can go through these tragedies and see some of the worst, the dark side, as you call it, the worst of humanity, because there is evil, there is good.
Hmm.
But we can choose, he let it ruin his life. He let these negative things ruin his life as well as mine. And it was his choice to be optimistic. And I'm not saying he had to throw away all his caution and paranoia. I think that is there for a really good reason. I think even on an instinctual level to protect us or protect ourselves, we avoid, negative things. But I think just, wallowing in self-pity or the world sucks is you're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And what I want to also address was you mentioned, empowering people and overcoming tragedy, and you talked about how the people around you really influence who you are. And, unfortunately, a lot of people have to cut people out of their lives because they're just dragging them down. They say be around people you want to be like. And I agree with that. What I wanted to bring up is a kind of a more modern issue is in the past, you were really like whoever was around you. But you said it's not just the people, it's the news, it's the social media, it's the environment, the
Hmm.
podcast you're listening to. Nowadays we have targeted ads. Your life is getting more and more personalized. Your feed, what social media and companies are feeding you. And so I just want to discuss that, one of the
Hmm.
cons of it. Now, it's great having a personalized life. Like I love how I can go on YouTube or, the internet and it's like, wow, this is exactly what I want or need. Like I love that.
Hmm.
It makes my life easy. But one of the downsides that studies have shown is, hey, you know, it develops a closed-mindedness. And I
Hmm.
think, we talk about people who aren't for you being in your closest group of friends or people in your life. I think on some level it's important to have those people who have different perspectives and, even the people who aren't for you, open your mind up to different things. And so I just want your opinion on, how our minds are getting more closed and what you think about all of that.
Yeah, I completely agree that social media can become an echo chamber. And especially when you have
Mm,
perspectives, if you are locked into an identity of like, this is who I am, and this I'm defined by being a part of this political party or this religion or this,
right.
you can lock into that echo chamber and it prevents expansion, but it also creates a desire and a need for a purity of ideas. And what
Mm,
happens is that when you're in that space of the purity of ideas, suddenly there was a great joke back in the 70s. My husband's 19 years older than I am, so he has some references that I don't necessarily have, but I forget the comedian who's the name of the comedian, but he was a really kind of funky, odd comedian. And he
yeah.
had this one joke, and I'm totally going to butcher it. But he saw this man standing on a bridge, and he said, "Oh, you are," he goes, "Oh, I'm this person, and I'm of this faith." And he goes, "Oh, I'm of this faith too." And he goes, "Oh, I'm of this faith of this denomination." And he goes, "Oh, I'm of this faith of this denomination too." And he goes, "Oh, I'm of this faith of this denomination of this creed of 1860." And he's like, "I'm the,"
Right.
and it was, so he went on like four layers deep until
Right.
they finally got so granular that he goes, "And I'm the faith of this person of the 1860 from Wyoming," or, and then the other guy was like, "Oh, and I'm the person of this faith from this thing from Indiana," and he goes, "And so I pushed him off the bridge because that
Right.
one little granular detail suddenly creates this difference of the need
Right.
for, that person is no longer pure. That person is no longer one of you because they don't believe exactly every single thing on to the tiniest granular
Right.
detail." That's the greatest way to create so much divisiveness in the world. And we're seeing that right now. And I think the thing is,
Yeah.
in order to be able to bring about a common ground and a common conversation and to just be able to interact with humanity is to recognize like nobody, period, nobody ever will have the same life experiences, exact belief systems,
Yeah.
exact down to the letter that you have, because your life is so unique and special and different. And that being said, there also is a commonality of emotion. If we look at what are those emotions that we're resonating with other people,
Right.
every single person, I don't care what your experience has been on this planet, what you've lived through, what you've gone through, sadness, grief, love, happiness, anger. We all know these emotions are our common denominator. And so
Right.
when we can look at who we're resonating with, what is the emotional level that we're playing at, and when we see somebody who is different than us, who has a different idea, a different belief system, look at how are we the same? How do we have like I love to follow people that I disagree with, because in that space it provides me with perspective of like, oh, I've never thought of it that way before. I could see how this person, even though I disagree on the maybe the mode of how they're going about, or the belief system of how they think that belief should be enacted, I see the compassion. I see how much they deeply love people, and how
Right.
I see the intention is to not judge. The intention now is that created in action, not necessarily, but the I see the intention. When I can see the intention, then I can see their heart. And
Right.
that creates unity because then you have a place of common ground that you can then work through.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Emotions are what makes us human, right? And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, Stephen Barrow and I, at the time of this recording, we just launched a new podcast together called The Generational Bridge Builders because we're trying to bridge the gap between not just the generations, but between races and age and all of this, the different cultures. And one of those things you mentioned, just the smallest difference in ideas causes such a big gap between people, divides families, brings families apart.
Yeah.
But what he said was, it's all about love. And that's what you're saying, the compassion, the love, right? I think a lot of people, I think almost everyone has good intentions behind what they do. It's just how they go about it. But yeah, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, we're all human. And so on that show, we're trying to bridge those gaps because more than ever nowadays, they are wider than they've ever been. I mean,
Hmm.
parents and kids are so drastically disconnected from one another,
Yeah.
and Miss Spencer, I know you're a mom,
Yeah.
how, and your kids are pretty young, but how do you feel like raising them compared to how your mom raised you and all that and your parents, like the differences you've noticed because kids are like being raised by their phones. I mean, and I disagree
Hmm.
with this. I completely disagree with this. Like toddlers and small children having tablets and iPhones, full access, like I think it's good that kids are so, technologically like knowledgeable, but I think there's
Hmm.
a lot of bad that comes with that. And what's your opinion on that?
There can be. So I'm raising two boys right now, and the difference, first
Yeah.
and foremost, yeah, is they're currently 6 and 2. And so the
Mm.
difference that how I was raised versus how we're raising them is with our boys, we're raising them very consciously. We are not
Mm.
shaming them or guilting them for having emotions. That's what
Okay. That's
I
good.
basically struggled with because
Right.
when living with an addict, what they're doing is they're escaping their emotions. They're escaping those painful feelings. And I believe that we're gifted the children that we need. And so
Okay.
I am a challenger and I am a very emotional person.
Me too.
And and so in that
Yeah.
space, like with my father and with even with my mom, because my mom is very pragmatic. She
Mm.
emotions are messy. Like they don't fit into a box. And she didn't know how
Okay.
to like hold space for them.
Okay.
So I learned to shove my emotions down until they exploded. And that's basically the physical manifestation of bulimia. So, what we're doing with our
Okay.
kids is we want our boys to be able to be conscious. We want them to be able to use language. Studies show that kids who are not exposed to as much language as uh, kids in underprivileged areas,
Right.
that the differentiation in how many words they're actually exposed to is vast. And if you think about it, if a kid only has the range of like 0 and 10, like they have neutral and angry, and that's the only range that they know,
Mm.
then they will immediately go to a 10 of anger instead of going, I'm frustrated or I'm peeved or I am annoyed. So it's those subtler emotions, if we can label those
Wow.
with less powerful language, it changes how we interact and how we engage. So no longer are kids seeing like, oh, I can only have anger. They're like, there's other smaller emotions that we can feel. And so we're helping our boys navigate that with language, navigate and honoring, and just when they're having big feelings, they're having big feelings. And we just call it that. We don't make it bad. We don't make it sad. We make
Right.
it. And the other thing that we work on in our family is not yelling. And I'm not always perfect at it, I can tell you that.
Yes,
Um,
ma'am.
but we really do our best to hold the space
Right.
for a no drama discipline approach. And that's actually where we got our kind of parenting manual, is a book called No Drama Discipline. And if you
Okay.
think of the word discipline, it comes from the word disciple. It comes from the word of like
Right.
leading. How do you actually demonstrate leadership? Because this is when your kids are feeling big emotions, they're in pain. Like if you think of physical pain, like they're
Yeah.
in pain and they don't know how to express it. Like I can definitely say from not having the language of emotions early on in my childhood, like I didn't know how to express the stuff that was in me. And so it just kind of exploded out everywhere. And I didn't have a container to like put myself in. Kind of like I think of it like in the Avengers, how the Hulk
Right.
they had that container on the ship where like that's where the Hulk is gonna
Yeah.
go, just in case he gets hulky. Like I
Right.
needed one of those rooms growing up. So that's one way. The other piece to speak to your tablets, I think technology is amazing. I think that it's
Right.
phenomenal to engage with. I also think that there needs to be limits. Like I think that uh I we are very much like when we're on the road, unless it's a really long road trip, like if it's a 15-minute drive, we're not giving the kids an iPad. Like that's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like go out, allow yourself to be bored, allow yourself to look out at the world, allow yourself to like
Right.
notice what you notice.
Have an
That's how we
imagination.
build, yeah, that's how we build self-awareness. I
Yeah.
also love the fact that on the iPad, like my son, we really curate like what our kids watch and listen to. So when they get Khan
Yeah.
Academy, and which is a phenomenal way that they have learned language and shapes. They get Duolingo to practice their reading and language and learning
Okay.
stories and learning how to tell stories. They got Montessori, which is an app that really allows for them, or it's Monterosi, one of those. Um, but all of them are learning based. We don't have social media
Right.
apps. I will not expose my kids to social media, though it is funny because my son does vlog.
Huh.
I will
That's
see
funny.
he's a natural creator. And so he will literally be there with his iPad and I don't share these videos because they're just so personal for him.
Yeah.
And he also shares like locations and things. I'm like, I don't want people knowing that. Like it's just for safety. But he'll be like,
Doxing. Yeah.
"Hey guys, I'm at In and Out." And it's really cool to see him wanting to create. And now he wants to start a podcast at 6 to interview astronauts. Like though these are the amazing technological abilities that we have that I think can be leveraged, but they have to be leveraged consciously. I've seen parents pushing their kid around while the kid's watching an iPhone of Coco Melon, which by the way, Coco Melon is studied by scientists to have to trigger the same neural pathways as heroin. It's
That's
it's
funny.
that bad. So you want to
That
look at
is real
how much
funny.
you're stimulating and be able to see, so there's no wonder kids are overstimulated because if they're
Baby Shark.
constantly on the phone and Baby Shark and Coco Melon, those those shows are so bright and colorful, and if they don't see that there's a whole world around them. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing as parents is we have to recognize when we're projecting our boringness like onto our kids. For a kid, a baby, like they look at the world and they're like, there's a butterfly and there's a bird. Like they look at the world through the lens
Right.
of wonder. And yet I think as adults have gotten very jaded where it's like, oh, it's another trash truck. Meanwhile, my 6-year-old and my 2-year-old, if they see a trash truck, it's like it's the biggest day on the planet. Like it is
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
big deal. Like my kid came home from his PE and he was like, "Mom, we saw a trash truck on the drive." And I was like, "Yes, you did." But it's that and it's celebrating that experience
Wow.
rather than projecting our own BS onto our
Oh
kids as
yeah.
saying, "Oh yeah, I've seen a trash truck, like whatever, it's nothing." Let them allow yourself to have the childlike wonder that your kids have and watch how much your world
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. I'm definitely a boy then who was raised like that because I still see trains. I'm like, it's a train. There's a train over there. Like I'm, and
Do you still count the cars? Like how many cars are there?
no, no. I always think I'm like, what if I just hopped on? I always think that. But it's interesting that you say this because and maybe it's just the way I was raised or who I am. But when it comes to kids interacting with kids, I'm very encouraging of stuff like that. And you're saying some parents are dismissive, and I believe it.
Mhm.
I've definitely seen it.
Yes.
But I'm a person, and I think it stems from my view on life. Every time I see a sunset, I'm like, wow, look at that. Is beautiful. Every time I
Yes.
drove home and I saw a sunset, and even if I see a rainbow in the sky, like after a rainstorm, some people are like, they couldn't care less. I'm like, look at that, that's beautiful. And I love going out in nature. I'm always looking for snails and worms and crabs, and I'm a regular boy, at the end of the day. But
Yep.
I think that wonder is so important. And it's funny, they addressed it in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, like the middle one that came out with the Mike TV scenario. They said it kills
Mhm.
it leaves no room for imagination. Everything's being imagined for you.
Mhm.
Like you mentioned, all these bright, colorful, stimulating shows and everything. I think it's funny you said Coco Melon and Baby Shark and all that because That did blow up for a while. It's funny you mentioned that because they keep remaking all the shows that I grew up with. They keep remaking them, and they're more colorful,
Hmm.
they're more cartoony, they're stupid. I hate to say it, they're stupider. I hate them. Like I see like Ben 10. I grew up watching Ben 10. I love that. I begged for the Omnitrix every Christmas because I was like, I can get it. I'll turn into alien. Santa can do anything. Turns out Santa can't
Nice.
gift you alien DNA, but every time, and that's just one show, but I've seen other shows like Teen Titans. Like some people hate
Hmm.
Teen Titans Go. I have younger sisters. That's why I've seen all this stuff. I just want everyone to know, like, when you're an older brother or a mom, you get exposed to all kinds of stuff. Sometimes
Oh,
the same
yes.
movie on repeat. Do your kids have a movie they keep playing on repeat? Because my sister watched The Book
Oh,
of
yeah.
Life over and over again, which is a great movie, but it's like, some people watch
Cars.
Nemo. Cars, that's a great movie.
Cars 1, 2, and 3.
Just
Those were
over and
on
over
repeat
again.
when we were living in Australia. Like our son was obsessed. And the great thing is like I love movies that teach a lesson.
Oh
Cars 2,
yeah.
not so great. But
Yeah.
like Cars
Cars 3, I
1 and
cried. I
3,
cried
oh my
during
gosh, I
that.
cried.
So,
Yeah, I thought that
yeah.
that was such a beautiful lesson of, evolution, of just, letting
Yeah.
yourself surrender your pride and let the
Yeah.
next generation come up. And it was just, it
Oh yeah,
was,
Cars 3 was touching. But
it
even the
was very
first
touching.
one, Cars 1
Yeah.
and Shark Tale talk about popularity versus being a human being. And I think it's great. And
Yeah.
Cars 1 is famous to not famous, and Shark Tale is not famous to famous. And both are great, progressions. And sometimes I watch kids' movies, I'm like, wow, there's like a actual powerful message here that like I just, I was too young to understand. And sometimes I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa. But yeah, and nowadays it's less like every time I see movies and kids shows, and there's a lot of political stuff in it too. They're pushing a lot of political stuff,
There can
a
be.
lot of
Yeah.
messages, but besides that, it's also just a lot of dumbing down, and I hate that. But like you said,
Yeah.
there's those educational tools like ABC Mouse and Duolingo. And I think, the technological interactions can be great for education.
Yeah.
I've been with people who are working in the VR and AR and immersive experience, and I think it's great. But like you said, and I'm very anti you talked about road trips, but for me, the even worse one is parents who just want their kids to behave in a restaurant, so they give them a tablet or a phone. When I grew up, my parents were very strict with us. So me and my siblings, we would sit in a restaurant quietly like adults, and there would be
Hmm.
kids who were running around screaming, and people would come up to my parents and be like, "Your kids are so well behaved." And nowadays, it's like I'll say like this: technology is a cop out to parenting. It's an easy scapegoat.
It can be. And I will say that I held the same beliefs before I was a parent. And
Okay.
I think I
Yeah.
used to think like I was that super judgy single woman who would see kids on leashes and I'd be like, it's called parenting. Like, why would
Yeah.
you ever leash your child? They're not a dog.
Sometimes you
And
need
then
a
I
break.
and then I had my second son. My first totally would listen to anything I said. He was like never would run off. I would say freeze, he would stop. Second son, oh God, that kid, his name is Colton and we call him Bolton because he just off. And I'm
That's
like,
funny.
and so I used to have a lot. I think your paradigms shift, and I think it always comes back
Yeah.
to balance. Like our kids know that when we go out to a restaurant, like ideally, I always bring toys, but I always have the backup as an
Right.
iPad because it's a privilege when we go out to a restaurant in this
Mm.
in that space versus
Right.
versus like at home at the dinner table. There's no tech allowed on the dinner table. So it's a
Yeah.
special occasion and we create the frame and the environment that like they don't normally get French fries, so they get to get French fries and they get to have an iPad and they're like, this is a special occasion for them.
Okay.
So we frame it like that. So it's not a consistent thing because it is about balance. Like, yes, we don't immediately take out the iPads, but if that's
Right.
requested, then we have it be, and it's conditional. It's conditional on their behavior as
Okay.
well. Like I want them to know that
Yeah.
they don't get to have iPads before they order and they have to order their
Right.
own food. They get to use their voice and
Okay.
practice giving
Yeah.
commanding language. So there is an asking to be served and learning how to receive and learning how to be uh
Right.
gracious. My 6-year-old, he helps me, figure out the tip because that's his addition. Like,
Okay.
and so we
Yeah.
bring them into life, and it would be incongruous if I said, no, we're not doing iPads because they see me on my computer a lot. And
Right.
so, but they also do see mommy shuts down the computer. And when mommy shuts
Right.
down, like it's no more computer time. Like I love the fact that my son though is doing third grade math in first grade. And that's
Right.
because of the iPad and because of
Yeah.
mathnasium.
And I think, yeah, I think having it as a reward compared to I don't want to, deal with you because I'm exhausted or whatever is a big difference.
Yeah.
And yeah, also I was gonna say you could definitely train me with French fries. I don't blame your kids. French fries are amazing. I actually went on like when I was in high school, this study came out basically that was like French
Uh-huh.
fries are bad for you. They take years off your life. And I actually went on a French fry free diet, which was very difficult being on at the Jersey Shore on the boardwalk. Everyone's getting French fries and I was like, you know what? I'd rather have years now with French fries than those years where I'm like, can't even walk. So, and just speaking of that, I also went on a sugar-free diet, to work on the
Hmm.
six pack. And it's funny how my dad suddenly starts buying my sister's ice cream, when I'm on the sugar-free diet. But when I wasn't, and there was no ice cream for anyone. But
Yeah.
anyway, that aside, bringing it all the way back to what you said before, I want to address was emotions and communications. And I think what you said was something I never thought about, at least consciously, but not having words to express yourself. And it was so interesting for you to say people who aren't exposed to language or reading or as many words are limited in how they express their emotion. And I
Hmm.
was like, wow, that's true because aside from, you know, when you don't have words, then you have actions. And a lot of times it's going to be bad actions. And so I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but I realized that you're right because my one friend, anytime he gets mad, it's just like stomping the feet and like, and like he's like, and it's like, what's wrong? And he's like, I can't explain it. I can't express it. And I
Hmm.
think what you said, teaching children to all these different words and this level of emotion and emotional control is so important. And
Yeah.
I think it's important for them to have words and de-stressors that are positive. So when I went on the Transforming You live show with Marcus Hart, we talked about distressors because a lot of military members take up negative de-stressors like, addictions to sex, to smoking, to drinking, to excessive sleeping, which people don't understand why that's bad. But I have sailors who I served with who they worked all day, went home, slept away until it was work again. And all
Hmm.
they just crave sleep constantly. That's not good.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people out there living half a life, so to speak. They only live they're asleep more than they're awake. That's awful. But we talked about good
Yeah.
de-stressors, and I think tying that into communication, being able to write, teaching your kids, poetry and not making fun of men for writing poetry as well, and songwriting and stuff like that, because there are people who, despite being educated in language and words, they just can't express themselves through words. And I think that's just,
Hmm.
it's how we're raised or it's just how we're born. I'm not sure. I not studied in that, but I think creating outlets for your children to express themselves is so important. And I
Hmm.
think that whole emotional spectrum. So I commend you for that, for having that. And I definitely agree with having your sons, know that as a man it's okay to express yourself. I think it's still a very big ongoing movement right now, the shift towards men's mental health and what a man can and cannot express. I think it's a huge
Hmm.
thing, because you've got a lot of old timers who are still very masculine, right? And I'm not saying it's toxic masculinity. I think there is a time and a discipline for men to express themselves. And I think
Yeah.
especially as a leader, whether you're leading a family or a company or whatever, when you express your emotions is very important. And I'm not
And
saying never
how
express
as well, like
as
how to
well. Yeah.
consciously express them. And that's something I teach my clients.
Okay.
Um, is because emotions, it's just energy in motion. And like this is what we do with our kids as well. When they're having big emotions, like how does that make you like what does that feel like in your body? Like I'm not interested
Right.
in the meaning because our brains are meaning makers. So we want to make a meaning
Right.
out of the emotion, but that's not necessarily the what we need. What we actually need is a
Right.
physicality to like release that energy in motion. So it could be like punching a pillow. It could be screaming into a pillow. Like I've had many a client scream into a pillow. Um,
Yeah.
I had one client who laid on the floor and like stomped her feet because that's how it felt like just she needed the grounding and she needed to move her body in that way.
Right.
And then once she processed it, she's like, I'm fine. And it's so often we don't give ourselves that permission to actually fully physiologically feel our feelings. And that's when they get
Right.
bottled up into emotions. A feeling biologically lasts 90 seconds. Most people cut off their feelings at around like 20 to 30 seconds because they're like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this. And they should themselves out of
Right.
actually feeling the biological expression. So thus they shove it down. And I like to attribute it to kind of like the game of Jenga, where you start to
Yeah. Yeah.
build on the Jenga set. And eventually, like you'll have moments that just are like pulling out these pieces of
Right.
your emotional bandwidth. And so suddenly the tower comes crumbling down. And that's when you get the explosions of anger, the suddenly breaking down into tears.
Right.
Like that's when you get that is when you're not actually allowing yourself to have that moment to feel what you're feeling, to acknowledge it, what it is that you're feeling. And I'll be honest, I struggled with this with my husband and being able to allow him as a man. Like I teach this to my kids, but my
Right.
husband, that was hard for me to learn how to
Right.
like, oh, when he has a moment to like allow him to fully feel it,
Right.
rather because for me, that meant danger as a kid. Like where I'd be like, I just want
Okay.
to make
Yeah.
it nice.
Because
I just want to make it like, I just want to make it good versus allowing
right.
him to feel it and knowing that I'm going to be safe as his wife, which of course I am because he's amazing.
Yeah.
But that like I'm going to be safe to have him have his container of emotion and I can hold the space for him to have that and have that big feeling. So it doesn't happen that often, but that was something that I really struggled with when we first in the beginning stages of our relationship was when he would have emotional moments or when he would feel let
Yeah.
down or when he would feel shame. I really struggled to hold that container for him because for me that was like danger, danger versus and that was just my childhood programming coming back.
Yeah, not just you, but and not just from parents, but women and men who have been in abusive relationships. You
Hmm.
know, I've been with women I dated, and you know they're afraid to say no to me or do this or that because their father, you know, if you ever said no to him, he would blow up on them, and you know,
Yeah.
and obviously it's difficult for people to process like, hey, this isn't my dad, you know, and that especially if, I mean, your parent, I mean, you're with them that's who raised you. You're with them for years, so it's hard programmed into you. And
Yeah.
a lot of women who get into those relationships are typically in them for a while in this toxic relationship where, you know, they can't say no to a guy or express their opinion. I have women who are afraid to ask for anything they want because they had, you know, partners who would just yell at them and say, no, you're
Yeah.
always asking for stuff. And it's so important for people to understand the impact we have on each other. You know, and usually on my show and the shows I've been on, I talk about the impact of just a small act of kindness, you know, just acknowledging someone's existence and thanking them and having a pleasant conversation with them. But on the other spectrum, the impact we have is so much more powerful when we're negative towards someone for a lot of times for no reason or because we don't know how to express our emotions properly. And you
Hmm.
talk about the physicality of it. I think that's why there's
Yeah.
so many studies that say people who go to the gym and express some of that. I think, you know, because as a society we're training, right? You're not going to throw a tantrum in public, but I think the gym is a great way to express that when you're thinking about that. Like for me, it's running. I'll run 6 to 8 miles at
Hmm.
a time, and that's where I process all my emotions, you know, because I write a lot of poetry. I've published 2 books of poetry, each about 500 pages, you know. But that being said, there are certain emotions that I'm like, look, I can't just sit here and write. You know, I'm like, I gotta go do something, like you said. And I've seen on your website, and ladies and gentlemen, you can check out Ms. Kimberly Spencer's website in the description below. But seeing you talk about Pilates quite a bit, is that an
Hmm.
emotional outlet for you? And is that something you teach your clients to get their emotions out there?
Yeah, so I Pilates was my first business when I was 19 years old. I was needing
Wow.
a job in something because I was supporting
Right.
myself in entertainment and entertainment does not have stable income and in the
Yeah.
beginning. And
Yeah.
so I
I can
wanted
agree.
something that would provide me with a schedule and but that I could have control over. And I found Pilates. And prior to that, I'd been an exercise-induced asthmatic. I couldn't run a mile to save my life. And I struggled with, I knew that the gym was kind of a more toxic place for me to be
Right.
because I was still battling with bulimia. I was 19 years old. And I found Pilates, and it was the first time I ever felt good in my body. And I was like, whoa, what is this? And I did it for a month. And then I said, I need to teach this. And so I went out and I started freelancing as a Pilates instructor.
Okay.
Within a year, I became the highest paid, most fully booked instructor at the studio that I was freelancing at. And I'm not surprised because looking back and now, like all the things that I know about leadership, I led very authentically because Pilates was an absolute game changer for me in how I perceive my body. Why? Because Pilates, like yoga and like qigong, are is a form of exercise that activates your parasympathetic nervous system as you are moving your body. And
Mm.
even Sylvester Stallone just did a video on how he did a Pilates class. He's like, that is no joke. One of my favorite people
Right.
to train were like the big bodybuilders who would come in and they're
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh, Pilates. And I'm like, it was invented by a German man. It's not as easy as you think.
Yeah.
And but Pilates, because you are inhaling and exhaling, and the exhale is longer than your inhale, it is activating your parasympathetic nervous system, which is actually creating the rest and digest. And if you've been through trauma or experienced trauma, what you first have to get to is a space of nervous system regulation. I
Mm.
am not just about like, oh, let's just think positive and suddenly all the
Right.
trauma will just go away. No, you actually, if your body is somatically trained to be in a sympathetic fight, flight, freeze state, especially for your military listeners,
Right.
like it's trained, like you've been conditioned to act immediately or else
Yeah.
it's death.
Yeah.
So you have to understand how to regulate back into a parasympathetic state so that we have the emotional variation and the physiological, neurological variation from the fight flight into the rest and digest. And because we need both. Like it's not like fight, flight, freeze. It's not like the sympathetic nervous system is a bad thing. We need that to be able to kick a ball, to run after our child if they're running down the
Right.
street. Like we need that system. We just need to also know how to regulate it back into rest and digest. And so
Yeah.
Pilates helped me regulate my nervous system. And that's how I leverage it with my clients today is I don't teach them Pilates anymore,
Oh,
but
okay.
I do encourage them if they are looking for a form of exercise to do that. And I do teach them Pilates and somatic breathing so that they can activate diaphragmatic breath because when we're stressed, we only use the top third of our lungs to breathe.
Huh.
And when we and it's so you're not actually getting into your diaphragm, which means you're not
Right.
actually expanding your rib cage. And to get metaphysical, your rib cage, your heart chakra, and your diaphragm, which is your solar plexus, is like the center of power. And so if
Right.
you're not breathing deep into your diaphragm, you're staying stuck up here in your shoulders and your chest, which is why you get the breathing into
Yeah.
your shoulders
Yeah.
and the stress around your neck. So I teach my clients how to drop their breath down into their diaphragm and just practice that breath in their body to help them regulate because that's where we're supposed to be breathing in the first place. That's how our bodies are designed to breathe.
Right. And I think I'm gonna go try Pilates. I've done yoga. I love yoga. It is rough, and I always say that. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but people still think, it's a sissy thing to do. But yoga leaves me sore. And we did this one where she's like, "We're gonna twist all your organs." Oh, I felt that one. And really, I encourage anyone who is struggling to do yoga nidra, which is like a put you to sleep kind of yoga. The
Hmm.
lady will say that your bones are heavy like lead, and I have a lot of sleeping disorders, and between rotating shift work and anxiety and night terrors, like I wake up screaming like violent sleeper. I tell you that stuff knocks me out. Usually, like if you're an insomniac, I recommend yoga nidra yoga. I'll try
Hmm.
Pilates. But yeah, and I didn't know you taught me a lot about the nervous system right there and about the lungs and breathing. They do teach in the military breathing exercises like
Hmm.
breathe a square,
The
kind
square
of
box
picture a
breathing.
square. Yeah. That's the one I usually do, but even just in general and before we would do cross country meets when I used to run cross country, they would do the same thing. One just for getting you ready for cardio, but two because you're kind of nervous and stressed and we would, try to breathe with your full lungs. I think a lot of people aren't. breathing with their lungs fully. And
Hmm.
just, you had mentioned bulimia. And so what I want to ask you about that is what's your opinions on eating disorders and social media nowadays? And that kind of, do you feel like social media is making more people self-conscious? Because I can tell you, just from what I've seen on social media, I try not to like any accounts like that, but Instagram knows I'm a young man. They'll throw these super skinny girls on my feed, and I know I've dated a lot of women and been friends with a lot of women who constantly compare themselves to these, OnlyFans models and these girls on Instagram who are influencers doing clothing and stuff, and not just Instagram, but all of social media.
Hmm.
You know, as someone who's dealt with a eating disorder, how do you feel about that, and how does it differ from when you had yours?
Well, I'm very grateful that social media wasn't around when when I was going through mine.
Right.
I recovered because I chose to recover.
Mm.
Plain and simple. It comes down to a choice.
Right.
And secondly, like you'll be surprised at this, I started beauty pageants, which seems
I'm not
counterintuitive,
surprised. I'm
right?
not.
So that's how I became Miss Congeniality. But I started doing
Okay.
beauty pageants when I was 15 years old. So I was in the throes of an eating disorder. And yet you would think
Right.
like that sounds so opposite. Like, why would you put yourself into an environment that is one where you actually need to walk
Right.
out in a bathing suit and like show off your body? And I
Right.
actually did that because in beauty pageants, I found a community of women who were gorgeous, who
Right.
wanted to make a great impact in the world,
Right.
who actually cared. And when I struggled the most was actually when I was in high school because I was
Mm.
learning all of these things, biology and chemistry and like things
Right.
that the way that school is designed currently, they teach to the what thinkers. Had I known that if you just like, had they taught in biology class that if you engage your rhomboids and the external rotators in your back and you roll your shoulders back, that can actually send signals to your brain of confidence. When I was struggling at 15 with an eating disorder and no confidence,
Right.
like I would have been all over biology had I known that. But schools and the way that they teach typically, they don't give a why. They don't give a why or purpose. It's just you need to know this information. So here, memorize this
Yeah.
information.
It's just an
And I'm
info
very
dump.
skilled at like I could memorize it, but I didn't care. And so I knew
Yeah.
I've always had big dreams. I didn't care about dating. I didn't care about boys. I was not in that mind. I was very career focused, and I always joke. I'm like I've been in my 30s since I was 15. Like I have always been very
We are.
career driven,
Yeah.
and that experience of being in beauty pageants, that was where I started to be like, oh, I found my people. And so I found
Right.
community. I found an environment that was supportive. And I actually didn't find myself comparing myself to the other women because I was in that place of like looking at how do they weren't my competition. They weren't who I was trying to please. I was trying to win the crown. So I was like, how do I win the
Okay.
judges' approval? Not, I didn't care about the other girls. But I think that today with social media, a lot of women just naturally, and men too, they compare
Yeah.
each other. I was just having a lunch with some amazing women. And even then, these amazing, confident, super successful women, one of them was like, "Oh, I wish I could be skinny like you," and not to me, but
Oh,
to
okay.
another friend of mine. And
Okay.
I was like, "Ladies, like." It's those little comments that I learned
Right.
early on in the reprogramming of my mind that I wanted to stop making. I think one of the greatest
Right.
things I did was start teaching Pilates because I was surrounding myself with 10 different bodies a day that I was training. And there was
Right.
this one woman who I talked about in a book that I half wrote and never published.
Mm.
That I shared this case study of this woman, Grace, who came in with this stack of magazines. This was before social media, before Pinterest.
Right.
So, with a
Right.
stack of magazines of like, this is who I want to look like. Can you train my body to look like this? And I looked
Really?
at the picture and I looked at her and I was like, I didn't see a difference. And I have a pretty astute eye as far as like
Right.
body mechanics. So I'm like, I don't, I almost laughed and she was like, no, but can't you see like her deltoid is shaped a little more defined and mine is just a little flat. And I was like, barely see the difference. And it was in those moments of training my clients where I was like, oh my gosh, am I doing this to myself? Am I comparing myself when really I actually am already pretty far along and looking pretty darn good? Like, what? And then I realized the other piece was
Right.
that so often when we're chasing these external goals, either with money or with weight, like that number holds a meaning to us. And when I realized
It
that the
does.
meaning of the number wasn't, I'm not chasing the number. I'm chasing what I feel like that meaning will give to me. What do I feel like that'll give to me if I am at that weight? What do I feel? What will I be feeling like on a daily basis if I'm at that weight? I found the same true financially with business. So often
Mm.
people have like they want to hit their first six-figure year or their $1 million year. And
Yeah.
they're like, oh, I want to make $1 million. Okay. What does that mean to you? Like how do you feel? How do you think you will feel different when you have $1 million compared to how you feel now? Because
Right.
what you're actually chasing is the feeling. We chase emotions. We chase a feeling of what we think it's going to give us on the other side. And if we punish and we force and we try to brute force achieve our goals in that way,
Right.
you enact the law of diminishing returns and the law of reversed effort, because your subconscious mind, it doesn't respond to that. It'll actually rebel. It'll be like, no, screw you. I'm not, forcing myself into this corner. So we have to be gentle and kind and loving and commanding, but not in a way of like trying to like when I was recovering from my eating disorder, I initially I would like, oh, if I gained a couple pounds, I would beat myself up. I was so hard on myself.
Right.
Even today, my husband's like, I've never seen anybody be as hard on themselves as you are. And I'm like, I have eased up quite a bit in the past 20 years.
Yeah.
But the that ability to beat myself up, I had to surrender that as a part of my healing. And when instead of beating myself up, I got curious of like, oh, that didn't produce the results that I wanted. So what actually would? And that's why I always encourage anyone who's getting stuck in a silo of social media to just check your feelings. Like, how's your body feeling? Like, do you feel better? Do you feel more positive? Do you feel happier that you spent 30 minutes scrolling on your phone looking at pictures of women that
Nope.
that aren't you, that you're like, oh, I could look like her? Or do you feel worse? And if you feel worse, then you're not in the feeling of what it is, the goal that you want to achieve. So why are you punishing yourself?
Yeah, I'm interested because just thinking about you enjoyed being with these women who were in beauty pageants. And I wonder if subconsciously on some level it's because they were like you, because even though to you, you were probably like, they're so gorgeous. They're so much more gorgeous than I am. You were in a community of all women who beautiful women who was feeling the same way you were feeling. They
Yeah.
didn't feel good enough. And you talk about people always wanting to, achieve this and that. And I think humans, obviously there's different levels, right? But I'm going to use the word perfectionist. I think humans are perfectionists. They're always wanting more, always driven to, get more and to conform to others. And it is something that I can relate to because I've never dealt with bulimia, but I have been bullied my whole life for being skinny, by men only. Women have always complimented me, especially older women. They were always like, "We
Mhm.
wish we had your metabolism." I have a hyper metabolism. I'm actually on weight gainer because I lose weight every week. I had to spend double the amount of time in the gym as normal people to just gain back, my weight. And so, but what I found is, a lot of skinny guys don't want to go to the gym because of gym intimidation, right? Because you're like, this is where all the ripped guys go.
Mhm.
But I enjoy it because actually me and the guys I live with and people who will come up and talk to me, I mean, they're jacked. They're in perfect shape. And it's just like I imagine the beauty pageant women are, where they're like not happy with themselves. And this guy's, bicep is the size of my head. He's like, I could always be bigger, And
Yeah.
so I'm just curious, and just as someone looking from the outside, how being in a community where if that helped you with your eating disorder, because on some level they all felt awful about themselves. And I just want to clarify, bulimia is when you eat and then throw it up later.
Yes. Yeah. Or it's when you eat and you take a whole bunch of laxatives.
Hmm.
So I was both.
Okay.
What? what I found was the hardest stage to move from in
Okay.
learning and growth is from the stage of isolation where you think that you are where you are and quote unquote, and you'll know this by your language where no one understands. If you're saying no one
Right.
understands, then you're really stuck in a cage. You've literally
Yeah.
trapped yourself in your own prison. And even though getting out and into the community and like seeing different stages, what like with you with the gym or with me with beauty pageants,
Right.
or especially with me with teaching Pilates, when I had women coming to me sharing their insecurities, sharing their body, and I was like, oh my God, I'm not alone in this struggle. I thought I was the only person struggling, the only person suffering with this, and it made me such a horrible, bad, terrible human being for having this secret, because shame loves secrets. And it wasn't until I pivoted and I started just sharing my journey with my clients. And I was like, yeah, I haven't loved my body all the time, but Pilates actually helped train me so that I have a deep love for my body. And I had a process that worked. So once we get out of the space of like, no one understands, and I'm the only person struggling with this, and I'm the only person, when we're in that space, that's a very, those are dangerous words to be uttering, because that's a very close sign of that there's there's a spiral to severe depression and suicidal ideation in that spiral of you're the only one, nobody
Right.
understands that space. So at least getting out into any community will allow you some environmental perspective to move beyond. So at least knowing you're not the only one struggling. So
Right.
that it's a huge step to becoming free and to your own liberation from your own prison.
Yeah, and it's awful how, negative the world is when it comes to this, right? Because really, society and everything we think is what gets us feeling this way, gets us self-conscious. Like we said, these pictures that were being shown, or, the comments like, oh, I wish I was skinnier like you.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, what we need is compliments, confidence boosters. But we don't have that. We have a society where, and I can't speak for TikTok or Facebook, right? But I am on Instagram. I used to be on it a lot. I've cut my time down to almost zero, which has
Good
made my
job.
life so much better. It really has. And I would read through comments sometimes, especially on these posts, and it's like there's two types of comments: extremely perverted and sexual nature, right? Especially with posts of women, or just hate from women and men. Like that you should be skinnier, or you should stop posting this
Mm-hmm.
content because you're ugly and this and that. There's never just like a you're beautiful, or not never just support. It's always
Yeah.
either perverted or destructive, not even like criticism that could be like taken somewhere. It's things that people can't change. It's such a negative world, and we really need to boost each other up. And so
And
as we go
okay.
ahead, I was just
Oh,
gonna
I
say,
was
as
just
we
gonna
wrap things up here, what are some of your big takeaways that you'd like to leave everyone with?
Yeah, I mean, I find that there is massive collaboration at the top, and that the people, for me, make a conscious choice that even if I disagree with something that I see someone else post, I'm not going to be that person up in their
Mm.
comments being
Just
like,
hating for no
just
reason
hating on it.
doesn't
No,
benefit anyone.
I'm gonna do some introspection as to like what was it about that post that triggered me? Because when
Mm,
we can acknowledge that, and then when we can see the thing, our emotions are just signs of something that we get to heal within ourselves. It's
right.
just a signal. So when you can treat social media as providing you with signals, now the problem is that sometimes we get so many signals that we create an
Yeah.
environment where we get numb to it. And that's
Yeah.
when you get the people who say unconscious comments and who are spread hate because they are
Right.
just so numb to all of it, and they get to be a keyboard warrior to where something, if they were actually going to say something to
Yeah.
somebody's face, they'd get punched in the face. Like they would
Oh yeah.
never utter those things directly to a person,
Oh yeah.
but there's a safety behind a screen. And I think when we can acknowledge that if there is something that we feel like we need to be speaking up about more, or if there's something that's stimulating us or triggering us on social media, that's an opportunity for us to do some introspection. And and on top of it, be the encourager. Like one of the things that I loved about my dad, um, is that, and what everybody else loved about him, is that when he got sober, and even when he wasn't, he was always an
Right.
encourager of people and humans' dreams. He had his own demons, he had his own stuff, but
Yeah.
he always like he would spend night times because he actually was a YouTube star later on in life. And
Wow.
he would respond to people's messages and emails and just sending them encouragement. He would just send them like a Bible verse or a message or something that would just encourage them. And I hope to, for me, that's one of the things of his legacy that I hope to carry on is
Right.
being that encourager in the room, of being able to be the person that lifts people up, being the one who mentions other people's names in a positive context and saying, oh my gosh, you love that
Right.
person, you're going to really love this person, they're so amazing. And being able to be that person who is the light, because I've seen a fair share of haters over the years of being online for the past decade.
Yeah.
But I also have created almost like an energetic field, for lack of a better word, where I'm like, I am so trusting of my community to back me and to know the values of what I stand for, which is radical ownership, that when somebody disagrees with me, I will not engage with them if they just want to
Right.
um, blast just vitriol at me. But I will say if they want to open up a discussion, I'm happy to have that discussion.
Oh, of
But
course.
I also know that my community, and this is the power of community, they will also stand up for me. There was a post that I had, I forget, it was like a couple months ago. And
Right.
I didn't even see the comments on it because I have social media manager. And so sometimes I don't even
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
things that
Busy.
are said. And I actually, it was my best friend who told me, she's like, Kim, your community just rallied for you in this post. Because there's a
Oh
post
yeah.
about choosing a victim mindset versus like being in and having that carry with you. Because I always
Yeah.
like to frame the context that there's a big difference between being a victim of something that happened to you and carrying on a victim
Mm.
mindset where you're allowing that
Yeah. Wallowing in
experience
self-pity. Yeah.
to, yeah, to just
As
generate and fuel and shape your whole paradigm.
yeah.
So it was a post around that, and somebody definitely had some say on
Uh, it was
disagreeing
probably
with it,
someone who
who had
has
probably had some of victim
yeah,
mindset.
who has been yeah, of course. I can tell
Yeah.
you already.
And total compassion for them. My community was the one who stood up for me. My community was the ones who were up in the
That's
comments
awesome.
saying, you don't know, like they're like, she stands for a value of ownership and she's not calling you out personally. So if you're feeling personally triggered by this, like that's something that you get to examine. And that's the
Yeah.
power of surrounding yourself. Like if you find someone that will be your champion, that will be your cheerleader, we need those in our back pockets. We need those
We
people.
do.
And I've been blessed to find those communities, whether it's in podcasting. I love the podcasting community. They're
Oh yeah.
so uplifting, so collaborative. And then I found a group called the Dames for 6, 7, and 8 figure business women. And that
Uh-huh.
community, it's just so supportive.
Yeah.
And so if you're not finding in your environment people that lift you up, you can find people on social media and you will see them in the comments of people who are like, hey, yes, you're doing amazing, congratulations. And be the person, like be the change. Start celebrating other people's wins. And there's something that I say to myself anytime I see anybody have a win, especially on social media where we can get into like the comparative analysis, where I
Yeah.
say, if she can, I can too. If he can, I can too. So I'm constantly
Right.
saying that all the time as I'm seeing people post their wins, even if it's something that I've already achieved, even if it's something that
Right.
I've already done, I still repeat that in my head to remind myself of being a beacon of possibility.
Yes, ma'am. Well, Miss Kimberly, thank you so much for coming on with all of this wisdom. You're so positive and so fun, and I encourage all of the listeners, ladies and gentlemen, please check out her show if you love her, if you love her content, and if you want to transform your life, the link is going to be in the description below. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of that with us. I had a great
Thank you
time.
so much for having me, Mr. Whiskey. It's been a pleasure.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air, on this voyage we have to share. working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, the source of great pride.